All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. I was having trouble getting onto Brightspace for some reason. So I had to go right to Zoom. Hmm. Right. Let's get the old slideshow going. I guess I hope everyone saw my announcement. Um, just in case you haven't, it was really just a reminder that the due date for the essay in the slides was not the correct due date. I did announce this in the essay writing lecture, but it seemed that, well, it actually seemed from the views on, not that I normally pay attention to this sort of thing, but um, it's evident that not all students have actually watched the lecture on how to write an essay. Um, So I don't know. If you haven't, you probably should. Although I suspect all of you who are here have probably already watched it. But yeah, so that's what that announcement was for. The due date on the slides is incorrect. The due date is November 22nd. So, oh, hello. Are there any other housekeeping issues? Can't think of any. A lot of people are emailing me asking for advice on their essay topics. This is a good thing, right? I think it's better to double check if you're not certain about anything. And people seem to be doing that, so I want to continue to encourage that. So does this fellow right here. Hello, sir. Oh, right, the reminder of the drafts. You're right, Kaya and Jonas. That is true. You are required to submit proof of student work, and you can submit that in the same Dropbox that you submit the essay. There's unlimited file submissions. Don't feel like you have to send like every single thing. But to like a couple of drafts plus the final. And you can just save, if you're working on your paper this week, at the end of the week, save essay, rough draft. Next week, essay, second draft, and then save the final one as the final draft. Send me all three of those files, right? And again, this is just because uh, the TAs and I have to really watch out for generative AI in this age of AI that we're in, which is annoying. But just to make sure that all work is actually completed by everybody whose name is on the paper, that's what we're going to have to do. All right, let's talk about things. So remember our discussion from last time. We had two different views of substance. One was the substance attribute framework, which is due to Aristotle, where each individual is a primary substance. And um, these primary substances have essential characteristics or essential attributes, which make them the members of the kinds that they are. So perhaps as a human being, this is what Aristotle would have said, I have reason, I have logos, and that is the essential characteristic of being a human being. And so that is what makes me a member of that kind. Perhaps this fellow, his essential characteristic might be fur, four legs, whiskers, um, and those are essential characteristics for him, but there are other characteristics which individuate him from other members of his kind. Like, for example, April's friend there, whom I can see on the screen. Um, different colored fur, right? Isn't that right, sir? Yes. Okay. So, then we moved on to John Locke, who thought of substance as substratum, right? That to which properties adhere, right? Stuff we don't know what it is, right? What is substratum? Locke would say we know not what, but whatever it is, it's what holds all of the properties together, right? So that's the substance as substratum view that comes after Aristotle's substance attribute theory. Now, after these two, other empiricist philosophers came along. Remember, Locke is an empiricist. He's one of the British empiricists, which means he believes that ultimately the source of knowledge is the senses or sense experience. Um, but a few other empiricists came along, namely George Berkeley and David Hume, and they argued that actually, if you think about it, on sense experience, there's really no need to suppose anything like substratum exists. So, in the words or words similar to words that Hume used, um, when you look at an individual, or not just look, but when you perceive an individual, you don't perceive substance directly. All we really perceive are um, these bundles of qualities or properties, bundles of characteristics, right? And so this is bundle theory. Berkeley uses a sort of subtraction argument. And we talked a little bit about this when we were discussing his subjective idealism, right? His factual phenomenalism. If you look at an object and you start stripping away all of the properties, so again, say I'm looking at my coffee cup and I start taking away properties like its shape, its hardness. If I strip away all those properties, what I'm actually left with is nothing. And it was on that basis that Berkeley argued that everything is idea. Ultimately, everything is everything is phenomena, right? There's no cup out there in the world. It's all just idea or phenomena, and we're all kind of existing together um, because the mind of God perceives everything all of the time, right? But here he uses the subtraction argument to say, look, if you take all of these properties away, right, there's nothing there. So what's the substance? Well, there is no substance. It's just a bundle of qualities, right? Here's what he says. Here's how he's quoted in Crumley. Um, as several of these qualities are observed to accompany each other, they come to be marked by one name, and so to be reputed as one thing. Thus, for example, a certain color, taste, smell, figure, and consistence, having been observed to go together, are accounted one distinct thing, signified by the name apple. So, for example, Berkeley says, think of an apple, and it has all these qualities: redness, sweetness, hardness, a sort of appley smell. If you take all of those away, on as we were saying earlier, you've got nothing left. But moreover, when we encounter these things regularly in that collection, in this apple-like collection, you go to the grocery store and you're in the fruits and vegetables section, and you see a bunch of apples, and they're all pretty much the same or quite similar. You're seeing little bundles of red, round deliciousness sitting there in the bin. Well, we just call that collection of things apple, but there's no substratum holding all of that together. It's just a bundle, and uh, so we're getting rid of this whole we know not what problem. Like, what is substance? Locke doesn't know. It must be what holds the properties together. And Berkeley says, well, why can't it just be a bundle of properties? That seems to be simpler, right? And then later on, David Hume would say, I would fain to ask those philosophers who found so much of their reasonings on the distinction of substance and accident, and imagine we have a clear ideas of each, whether the idea of substance be derived from impressions of sensation or reflection, introspection, right? If it be conveyed to us by our senses, I ask which of them and after what manner. So, okay, philosophers, a lot of you base, that's what he means by found. They didn't find reasoning like, oh, there's my reasoning. No, they founded their reasoning um, on this whole Aristotelian substance and accident thing, or, um, you know, substance and properties, we can say. Have you even ever seen this? Where'd you get this from? Right? Did you sense the substance? No, you didn't. That's what Hume is saying here. If you saw substance or if you perceive substance, how? Did you see it? Did you hear it? Did you smell it? Did you taste it? No, of course you didn't. So here's Hume being kind of snarky, like all of these philosophers who base their whole metaphysics on this notion of substance. What are you doing? Like, where's your reason to think substance exists? Because it's not something that you can perceive. It's not something that you can know by sense experience. And of course, Hume, being the sort of hardcore hardcore empiricist that he is, says that, well, if I don't have any sense experience of substance, then why should I suppose that it exists? Right? Rather, everything is just sort of a bundle of properties, right? Even if we could perceive it with our senses, Hume would say it's just another quality that we have, that we're able to perceive. A quality, it's not a substance, it's just another property. So substratum for Hume, if we could perceive it, substratum would not be substance in the way that we're thinking of it. It would just be a quality. So, Hume concluded, we therefore have no idea of substance, distinct from a collection of particular qualities, nor have we any other meaning when we talk of reason concerning it. So whoops, objects are bundles, bundles of qualities. Let's try and come up with some other examples. I've already done the coffee cup, so someone else has to think of something. We'll keep it short. We'll just do one example. One example of how we could describe an object not in terms of substance, but in terms of being a bundle of qualities. Yeah, all of those work. I like Kaya's. A bus is just a box of metal with wheels, engine, and steering wheel. Yeah. And remember, this is an important thing. We're not we can make an analogy with objects being made out of parts. But the properties are not strictly speaking parts, right? It's true that a bus is made out of parts. Um, but when we're talking about its properties, we're talking about maybe its color, the hardness of the metal, the um, the um, the transparency of the glass in the windows, right? So it's not just that stuff is made of parts. Like how I could say like my coffee cup is actually just a bundle of atoms, right? And that is true, but it's also a bundle of solidity, cylindricalness, etc., right? Yeah, and that's true. The parts themselves are bundles. So yeah, there's matter. The bus is made of matter, right? And it has parts, and they can be broken down into subparts. Um, likewise with the pair, right? Um, this is an analogy, right? We're talking about properties rather than parts. So, instead of say the skin of the pear, you might say the color of the pear, right? You might say the taste of the pear as well, because we're dealing with qualities or properties. So here's an interesting consequence of bundle theory. Um, all of the qualities that are bundled up, because there's no substance, all of the qualities that are bundled up together are taken as essential, um, to the identity of whatever object we're talking about. So the cylindricalness, the hardness, even this little chip right here, the handle, the fact that it becomes warm when it's got coffee in it, are all essential to what it is for this coffee cup to be this coffee cup and not some other coffee cup or some other object. And that's because there is no substratum. So without substance to define, um, without any kind of substance that gives you the essentiality, for something to be what it is, it must be the qualities or the properties instead. Now, a consequence of that is, if one little thing changes, if one simple change in the properties occurs, it changes the identity of the object. So, we're probably used to thinking about things in terms of the of one of the substance views where, I you can't really see it maybe if I move here, but I have a bookshelf right behind me. Um and Substance would explain why that bookshelf remains the same bookshelf even if I change it. For example, I could give it a new coat of paint, and you would say, if you were a substance theorist like Locke, you would say, well, it's the same bookshelf, you've just changed one of its qualities. But if I paint my bookshelf on bundle theory, now I have a different bookshelf. Yeah, a little bit like the ship of Theseus, right? You can think of the ship of Theseus, um, as a uh well, it depends how you answer the thought experiment, but whether you think it's the same ship or not might depend on whether you're a substance theorist or a bundle theorist, right? Now, we're not going to talk about the ship of Theseus yet or the transporter paradox. These are something we're going to save for the chapter on personal identity. But just for illustration sake, oh my goodness, I've got the sniffles this morning. Pardon me. Just for actually, you know what? Let me get a box of Kleenex just in case. It is cold and flu season, although I hope I'm not becoming sick. But yeah, the ship of Theseus, we'll get into this in full detail another time, but say I have an old ship that I'm using as a museum ship, and people can come and visit it. But over time, parts of the ship decay and they need to be replaced. Um, so over time, we replace those parts that need to be replaced. Um, until one day, all of the parts have been replaced and no piece of the original ship remains. Um, the question is it still the ship of Theseus? And some people would say yes, on the basis that, well, the whole thing has continued to exist, in some like form. Um, even though all the parts have been replaced, it's still a ship. It's continued to exist, over time since we started replacing parts all the way to when all the parts have been replaced. So some people would say it's the same ship. And yeah, I think that's what people are saying about bundle theory. Likewise with Kaya's comment about the teleportation, like Parfit's, and again, we'll talk about this in the future, but Parfit's transporter case, it's like the transporter from Star Trek, if you're familiar with that. It breaks you down, turns all your matter into energy and beams you across space, and then turns that energy back into matter and reassembles you on the other side, right? But we will talk more about that in future. But yeah, oh, allergies are bad. April, go ahead.
So would this kind of be like the same idea? So like the basilicas that have been around for like ever, they have obviously been um like redone and like heavily upkept, but always to their original look, right?
Yeah,
So would that be like the same idea that there's been changes made? So is it really the same basilica?
yeah, that's the idea. A bundle theorist might say, as soon as I change one plank on the ship or one stone in the basilica, it's not the same thing anymore because there is no substance to make it the same thing, right? Um, or when we were covering examples like this the other day in a different class, I used the example of my sourdough starter that I've been trying to make. I'm a little late to the party on this one, right? Apparently, everybody made sourdough bread over the pandemic, but I've been trying. And every day I have to feed it, right? So I have to get rid of half of it and replace that half with more flour and water so that the yeast have something to eat, right? And I'm diving down the sourdough rabbit hole on Reddit and YouTube, and I'm learning all about bread. Um, I guess I have a bread special interest now. And I hear tell of sourdough starters that have been in families for generations, like 50 years old, 100 years old. I heard of one the other day that was 130 years old. Someone had been keeping it alive over the generations for over a century. And that's a bit like the ship of Theseus, right? Is it the same starter? Well, it's certainly not all of the same flour and water that your great grandma started with, right? But it's continued to exist the whole time. So a bundle theorist might say, well, every time you discard and feed, no, it becomes something else, right? But a substance theorist might say, well, of course it's the same. That's your great grandma's sourdough starter in your fridge right there, right? So yeah, very interesting consequence for the metaphysics of things and what it is to be a thing, right? What would Hume say? Like, but Hume, if there's no substance and I paint my bookshelf, then I have a new bookshelf, but it's the same bookshelf. I've just painted it. How can it be a new bookshelf? And Hume would say, deal with it. It just is a new bookshelf. You're mistaken if you think it's the same because you're thinking like a substance theorist. And you're mistaken if there is some independently existing substance. That's another view of substance, by the way, is something that can exist independently, exist on its own, something that doesn't depend on something else to exist, right? You can't have blueness by itself. You can't have smallness by itself. You need a blue object or a small object, right? So substances are those things, again, to which properties adhere that can exist independently. The properties cannot exist independently. They need a substance. Locke would say, oh, he would say quality, but they need a substance for these qualities to be instantiated. But Hume denies all of this. We're just imagining that there's some substance that makes me me and makes the coffee cup my coffee cup and makes the cat this cat and not the other cat. Incidentally, the other cat is here now, so maybe I'll show him to you if he's not shy. But so this means that Hume is what we call an inessentialist. He doesn't think there's any one thing, substance or quality, that's essential to make a thing what it is, right? Remember last time we learned that Aristotle, for example, was an essentialist, right? There are essential characteristics that make all of us human beings, and that's reason. So, essentialism, there is something special, some special thing that we have that makes us who we are. And Hume denies this. He would say, no, there actually isn't anything essential. There's no substance, certainly, and there's no one particular quality that's taken as essential. And so we are just bundles, and Hume is an inessentialist. Okay, is everybody following so far? Any questions about bundles, about essentialism, inessentialism, etc.? Let's have a look in the chat. Good. When the chat goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, when it goes real fast, I know everybody either really gets it or doesn't. Because it's so easy to type yes or no as opposed to a question. Jonathan says it's more sensible than Tuesday stuff. Yeah. Oh, Sarah's like, oh, okay, maybe though the idea of substratum makes sense, makes more sense than this. Is that perhaps because it's a little bit counterintuitive to think, oh, now this Kleenex is making my nose, oh, I can't win. Ugh. Yeah, it's a bit counterintuitive to say that, um, like, okay, so the cat right here, Oki, sir, please come here, show yourself. So this cat, hello, sir. Oh, you're so big. Um, this cat is the long-haired cat. This is Oki before you met Yo-Yo. Now, it seems very weird to say that if I were to shave this cat, right? Imagine I trim his fur, that he becomes a different cat, right? I mean, that's like what? What? That does that make sense? It strains our it strains our sort of sense of plausibility to say like, well, if I give this fellow a haircut, he is now a different cat. Or if you go get a haircut, you are now a different person, right? Thanks. Yeah, this is my big fellow. Well, it's funny because my partner rescued both of these guys years ago. Um, she was on her way back from riding. She used to ride horses, and there was a mother and 5 kittens, um, stray. So she got them. Um, we found homes for all of them, but she kept this fellow, and I kept his brother. Um, and now they're roommates, although they don't actually get along very well. They kind of keep a distance from one another. So you'll never see them here at the same time. They just kind of switch places. Yeah, that's well, Jonas, good question. Like, so if I'm a bundle theorist, that means I believe if I change one thing, I change the object. So if I give him a haircut, it's a different cat. Okay. But then if he grows his fur back, he's the same cat as he was before. I don't know. I don't know how Hume would answer that. Maybe he would say it's a different cat again. Or maybe he would say it's returned to being the cat it was before. I don't know how he would answer that. And this is one of those weird things about bundle theory, right? Yeah, it would be different hair. Um, so maybe it would be a different cat. What about clones? Um, Clones would just be clones, right? They would be different. Two collections of very similar properties, certainly. Two very similar bundles, but different bundles. Oki. O-K-I. It's Japanese for enormous. And then the other guy's name was Yo-Yo, or is Yo-Yo. Because at the time I had another cat whose name was Spinner. And I just thought, oh, that kind of works. And they were roommates. Spinner unfortunately passed away when I was in graduate school. That was tough. That was really tough. And I miss the guy. I really do. Miss him every day. Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, it's hard losing a pet. That was a rough year. Um, because um because my cat died and then that was the year this is I was really trying not to go here, but that was also the year that Trump was elected to his first term. And now, of course, I'm getting flashbacks. I'm getting anxiety flashbacks to last time. So, yeah, not a good time. Not a good time. Yeah, it was a rough year. Yeah, and fur babies are family, April. Yeah. Justina's got a really interesting question. Hair is always growing. Does that mean that each time our hair grows out a little, we become a different person? Well, I don't think there's like one correct answer to this. It's like think back to the ship of Theseus, right? Like, do you think it's the same ship or not? Like if as I'm replacing old parts with new parts, is it still the same ship? If you think yes, then you probably also think that you're the same person, even if your hair grows and your nails grow a little bit every day, but you get a haircut, you trim your nails. Maybe if you have facial hair, you give that a trim, right? Um, right? If you think it's the same ship, you probably would say, yes, oh, I'm the same person, even though I got a haircut yesterday, right? Um, but some people might deny that, right? Yeah. And it's gonna get weirder. If you think these questions are tricky, I apologize for the second half of the lecture because it's gonna get weird. Um, so to finish up with bundle theorists would deny that there are kinds of things. We just decide like this collection of properties is called this and this collection is called that. Critics would say that this doesn't really help us out very much because on bundle theory, there aren't really any kind defining qualities. Um, and I think that this would, don't worry, not weird in a bad way, just weird in a sort of counterintuitive way. Yeah. But someone asked about clones, right? Um, so, here's another question we can ask. How do we distinguish between two objects with the same qualities on bundle theory? If there's no substance, there's no real kinds. Everything's just a bundle. If we have two identical objects, then they have identical qualities. Um, right? So imagine I had a clone and I've just cloned them. So we could imagine, let's say it's a transporter accident, right? To continue with the theme of the transporter and the ship of Theseus and so forth, right? Yeah, space and time. You're right, April. But let's say that um, before before they have a chance to really exist independently, I've got these two clones, and well, which one's which? They're pretty much identical. They haven't. They haven't woken up and begun to live their lives yet, right? Like you said, maybe we can do it via space and time. This one's over here, that one's over there, right? This one's existing in this moment, and this one, well, in the same moment, but in a different spatial location. So that's one possibility, right? We might also be able to do it with trope theory. Um, so we can say, oh, and there's a typo there. I always miss a typo. But if you recall trope theory, on trope theory, there aren't universals. There are just lots of little individual particulars everywhere. Particularized kinds, we could call them, rather than universal kinds. So these are tropes. So, think of the apple, right? The apple is red. If the apple is red, then the apple is not instantiate. There's not like a universal property, redness being instantiated in that individual apple. There's just a red trope. And then the car over there, that's another red trope. Um, so this was trope resemblance nominalism, if you recall. David asks if we become a little more extreme, since everything is changing every time, if we divide time into the smallest units, like each frame in games, for each me and frame is considered differently. Well, um, I guess you could do that if you wanted to, like if you, so, oh, this is complicated. I don't want to drop a whole lot of metaphysics on you, but what you're kind of getting at, David, is something from four-dimensionalist metaphysics. So the idea is that I don't just exist in three dimensions, I exist in four, time being the fourth one. And what I really am is kind of like a four-dimensional space-time worm. So, like, if you were to put me on a four-dimensional graph, you would see me in three dimensions, but also I'd be like a little space-time worm. And each frame, as you say, would be a time slice of me. Now, a lot of people who endorse that view say, um, you are continuously existing, right? We can divide it up if we want, uh, but there is a continuously existing space-time worm, if you like. But Hume might not say that. Hume might say that yeah, the me that I am now is not the me that I was yesterday. I've changed a little bit. And the me that I was yesterday is not the me that I was 10 years ago. There is some sense of continuity, but again, there's no essence. There's no essential thing that makes me me. I'm just a bundle, right? But let's not worry too much about this. See, it's tricky. Well, maybe. It depends. If you want to follow, like Whitehead and Heidegger and those guys that we're going to get to, it depends. Um, Let us save these questions, and this is what I should have said this earlier. These questions are a lot easier when it comes to objects, but when it comes to persons, they get a little trickier. And we have, yeah, it can be headache inducing. We have a whole chapter coming up on personal identity, like the nature of persons, when we'll be talking about this stuff. So we'll save this for that when it comes to persons anyway, right? But anyway, maybe we can talk about tropes. If we bring trope theory into the picture and incorporate that with bundle theory, then maybe this can help us to individuate objects with identical qualities. So if I have two books that are exactly the same, we can say like, okay, well, this book is rectangular in blue and this one is rectangular in blue. They both seem to have the same properties. How do I individuate them? Well, this one has this blue trope, and this one has a different blue trope, right? But then we're back where we started. What holds all the tropes together? We could say, if we want to be substance theorists, that it's some kind of primary substance or it's substance as substratum. But the bundle theorist is going to continue to maintain that it's all just bundles. It's bundles all the way down. All right, before we get to the next couple of thinkers, let's refill the coffee cup. Oh. Okie dokie. Oh, now we're ready to talk about Alfred North Whitehead, whose views are very interesting. Um, what do we got in the chat? So substratum, so this is what we talked about previously on Tuesday, but substratum is one way to understand substance. Substance as substratum is what holds all of the qualities together. It is where the properties of objects inhere. But what it is beyond that, well, John Locke would say, we know not what. We just know that it's something that exists independently, makes this object and not some other object. And it's what kind of sticks all the properties together. That's substratum. Yeah, like April put it, an invisible metaphysical glue, if you like, that properties can exist in. So, okay, Alfred North Whitehead. He was a philosopher and also a logician and mathematician. A logician is a particular kind of philosopher, somebody who specializes in logic, and a mathematician as well. A lot of philosophers have also been mathematicians. Um, Not just Whitehead, but his collaborator Bertrand Russell. The two of them, incidentally, tried to ground mathematics in logic using set theory, which did not entirely. I don't know if they ever finished it, like if they didn't finish it or if it didn't quite work. But in any case, other mathematicians who were philosophers, Gottlob Frege, Kurt Gödel, especially in the sort of analytic tradition, um, you see these sort of philosopher mathematicians and logicians, right? We learned a lot about Quine. Whitehead was Quine's supervisor at Harvard. So big deal. Now, Whitehead's views are difficult, very nuanced, um, and he views everything as process and event. Before we get into him, I'm going to ask you a question. You know that saying, you can never step in the same river twice? You ever heard that saying? Yeah, it's a famous sort of idiom, right? You can't step in the same river twice. What do you think that means? So it's new to some people, familiar to others. For all of you though, what do you think it means? Sarah says because the water is always changing, right? It's not the same river as the last time I've stepped in it. Yeah, the water, like Quinn says, the fish are swimming around in different places, the water's always flowing. Yeah. I can step in the river at one moment, but then the next day, step in it again. Is it the same river? No. And of course, over the long term, rivers wind and move and change. This little idiom goes all the way back to an ancient Greek philosopher named Heraclitus. And Heraclitus's work um, really only exists in fragments now. Well, you'd be in the same place, but you're not in the same river. Because think about it, that water you're standing in isn't the same water you were standing in yesterday, right? It's gone and flowed away toward the ocean, and now there's some different water that you're standing in. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you might be right, Cormac, but we're gonna save stuff about people for when we talk about identity, just because it gets a little complicated with people. So Heraclitus says, in the same rivers we step and do not step. What did he mean by that? Sure, you can't step in the same river twice, but you are also not the same person who stepped in the river previously. The river continuously changes and you continuously changed. So it's less about perception, I guess, if I'm getting back to Cormac's question, right? It's less about what we perceive and it's more about what we are being, right? Anyway, this little bit from Heraclitus, in the same rivers we both step and do not step, it really helps make sense of Whitehead. All things flow. He says all things flow. Another quote attributed to Heraclitus. That all things flow, he wrote, is the first vague generalization which the unsystematized, barely analyzed intuition of men has produced. Without doubt, if we are to go back to that ultimate integral experience, the flux of things is one ultimate generalization around which we must weave our philosophical system. But there is a rival notion antithetical to this. The other notion dwells on the permanencies of things. So, what Whitehead is saying here is that we kind of have to, um, whatever philosophical system we build, we have to contend with this sort of reality that everything is always changing. But we have this rival system that we've set up that emphasizes substance and unchangingness and immutability. So, for a substance theorist, the essence of a thing is, you know, the substance, right? If you're an Aristotelian, it's the primary substance. If you are like a Lockean, it's substance as substratum. But for Whitehead, the essence of things is their process or their continual becoming. This is possible because reality's nature is that of what Whitehead called duration, right? You know how we use the word duration, like for a duration over time? Over time, things continually become. This is what I meant when I said that things were going to get weird, right? We continually become. This mug is continuously becoming, right? Its existence is a process. And you can read about this if you dare in his book Process and Reality. And Whitehead looks at everything this way, even God, right? It's very Zen, right? Um, at this moment, I look at the tree outside of my window and it's there. It seems like a tree, something that exists independently and has properties, but really what I have is a very limited snapshot or a very limited time slice of the tree. Imagine I could speed things up. Um, I could see the tree go from seedling to full-grown tree to perhaps being cut down to rotting and being consumed by insects and fungus, and then returning to the earth as soil. And that's the tree. That's the essence of the tree, is its continued existence over time. Um, Whitehead calls this the creative flow of actual entities. So the tree is an actual entity, and its being or becoming that is its creative flow. Um, it's not like the tree is creative, um, but the tree is existing, right? It is part of creation. Now, our duration is our experience of the world. So part of my duration includes my experience of the tree, looking outside, watching it, contemplating its nature. That's part of my duration, part of um my process over time. And present expression is the novel expression of past experiencing. Our present experiencing is the novel expression of past experiencing. So right now I'm experiencing the tree, and that is a new novel, a new expression of what the tree was expressing just a moment ago. The leaves are moving in such and such a way now because they were in such and such a way a moment ago. So all of my experience and my existence and the tree's existence and everything else is a process. And my experience is a re-expression of past experience. I look at the tree, I've looked at the tree previously many times, and every time I look at it, I'm kind of re-expressing that experience. Okay, little check in. How are we all doing with Whitehead? It's kind of almost mystical, right? I like it. I'm not gonna lie. I think this is really cool. It's very zen, very like you know, all is one, one is all, right? For maybe we have some anime nerds who will get that reference. I don't know. But yeah, it's very zen. It is interesting, certainly. Now, there's some interesting similarities here with William James. James, when it comes to selves, I know I said we weren't going to talk about selves too much today, but when it comes to the self, William James thought that the self was really like a series of thoughts, impressions, sensations, um, kind of like pearls on a string, one after the other. And they're all sort of united by a special thought called the thought, which is the sort of meta thought that owns all of the other thoughts and sensations and ideas and so forth. Yeah, that's Heidegger actually. He compares Heidegger to Mahayana Buddhism. Yeah. Um, so for James, I am kind of like a bundle. I have thoughts, ideas, sensations, but they're all united or owned or given that sense of mindness by what James called the thought. Similarly for Whitehead, each little tiny duration is an actual entity. And this is kind of a bit like what Cormac was saying earlier, right? Um, each little duration is an actual entity. An actual entity is a little microcosm of the universe, connected to the whole of existence. So there's this creative flow to the whole universe. And the whole universe is reflected in me, just as I am reflected in the whole universe. Okay, so here is a similarity with Buddhism, and this is not something that's discussed in the textbook, but anyone who knows, well, actually, not Buddhism. I suppose it's talked about in some forms of Buddhism, but actually, this comes from Hinduism, which well, so does Buddhism. Ultimately, it emerged out of the Hinduism. Yeah, I guess you could liken the thought to the soul. in certain ways, but we'll talk about this more when we get to personal identity. Um, so in Hinduism, there's this idea of the web of Indra. Is anyone familiar with this, by the way? Familiar with interesting factoids about Hindu deities? So Indra is a god. Yeah, and Indra has um very interesting connections to other Indo-European figures, like Zeus, Jupiter, um, like Thor, and that's because he's a thunder god. He has a thunderbolt. So one thing he also has, though, is this web or this net, a golden net that he can kind of like put over his palace, and it's full of jewels, and each jewel reflects a little bit of every other jewel in the web of Indra. We're kind of like that too. So that's what Whitehead means when he says that um, each little duration is a microcosm, a little cosmos. It reflects the whole of reality in it. So it's this becoming of a being that involves um, eternal objects, which are kind of like the Whitehead equivalent of universals, and feelings. Now, Whitehead is not exactly a bundle theorist. Um, uh, he thinks that there is actual unity in combining these eternal objects, universals, greenness, solidity, the example universals that we had before. These are these are the eternal objects for Whitehead. So it kind of sounds like he's a bundle theorist because he's saying like, well, everything is really just a collection of eternal objects, but it's the process that unifies everything, the process of being. And the essence of any particular being is the final aim of its process, almost like an Aristotelian telos. Um, so that's the essence of a thing. He doesn't call it a telos, he calls it the subjective aim of the being. And every actual entity, oh, there's another typo. Oh, there's so many typos. Well, whatever. Every actual entity is like a little drop of experience, which manifests as what he called feeling. It's not a conscious feeling. Like the tree outside has feeling, but it's not like there's something that it's like to be the tree. It's more like um, the tree has a subjective aim, maybe to grow up and produce seeds and make new trees. That's the subjective aim of the tree. And the tree feels because I can affect the tree and the tree can affect me. It's not as if like I drive a nail into the tree and the tree is going to go ouch, right? But I can affect the tree and the tree can affect me. I can go and I can, I don't know, pick a leaf from it, but it can affect me. I can look at it and the tree can make me think, wow, what a beautiful tree, right? Um, so not all feeling is conscious feeling. It is for me, probably not for the tree, but that's what he means by feeling, or experience, um, or everything being a drop of experience. Relating it back to Hinduism again, kind of reminds me of the idea of Brahman, right? Which is the ultimate reality. And sure, you'd say, like, well, Hinduism has a lot of gods and goddesses, right? Well, yeah, but really, those are all kind of like different aspects of the whole. Those are drops from the ocean, right? Is there another example I can give? I'll try. Um, well, look at what I say on the second point. The tree reflects a world where I sense the tree. Let's go back to the river analogy. The river reflects a world where I can step in the river. I can step in the river, which might affect me, and I also affect the river. I can kick a stone um, off of the river bank, which might hit another stone and might, years down the road, cause the river to take a different course via erosion. And I might come back to the river at some point and reflect upon how I used to sit by the river and watch the ducks, right? The river affects me and I affect the river. And everything in the universe is like that. And that's what he means by feeling. And not like a feeling like a subjective, there's something that it's like, oh, I feel kind of warm because I'm sitting in the sun here, right? Not like that. But feeling like being affected by. Right? It's really neat. Like it's cool. It's just so like Zen, And Zen, what do I mean by Zen? Zen, like Zen Buddhist, right? Zen means all. So yeah, very cool. Very, very cool. Hard to understand. Yeah, like a never end well, domino effect, like that's a process, right? And yeah, yeah, ripples in the water. Yeah, it's all process. Those are processes. Um and Whitehead thinks, um, is he a coherentist? I'm not sure if he really ever. You know what? I don't think he did a lot of epistemology. He was a metaphysics guy, so I don't know. I don't know how I would categorize him. Because right now we're talking about, I'm hesitant to answer this because we're talking about what he thinks beings are. We're not really talking about frameworks of knowledge. So I can't really say on this basis. And beyond the textbook and, like Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, like I haven't read Process and Reality or Process Theology. I'm not an expert on Whitehead, so I don't want to mislead you. So I'm just gonna say I don't know. But I will say he's not really talking about epistemology, right? He's talking about metaphysics. Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. But again, like he's not talking about how beliefs fit together. He's talking about how beings in the world be, right? Um, so, instead of a web of beliefs, um, it's a web of being. The technical, if you wanted to give a name to what he's talking about, I would say he's a process philosopher because being is a process. There aren't fixed essential substances that make things what they are. What makes things what they are is their continual being, their process of being, right? All beings house the world within themselves, he said. And we're all connected intrinsically. Um, it's just such a neat way to look at things. I love it. I think it's great. And it shares some similarities with our next thinker, who is a controversial fellow. I will just say that now. April says, could it be explained in a way that as a human exists and senses the world, that is the process and duration would be periods. of time and feeling as the ripples. Something like that. Process is also the ripples because it's being, it's all being, right? We're all continually being. That's process. Um, each of us has our own being. Each of us is being over time, and that's our duration. And we have self-conscious feeling, and that we're all kind of in this big web of being together. And if you poke at me, the vibrations travel along the web to all the other beings. I probably won't test you on this. Like we have a quiz coming up next week. I'm putting it together now. Well, not like right now, but um, I'm probably not going to ask a written answer question on Whitehead or Heidegger. It's too. Ugh. Although maybe I will. It would be a good way to find out who's using AI because not that I don't. I mean, you're all very smart, but it would be easy to tell. Okay, I will have mercy upon you. Um, yeah, I won't test you on Whitehead or Heidegger. I might ask you a multiple choice or true false question about them, but I probably won't ask you a written, like short answer question. Right? Things are going to get weirder and, well, more eviler. Why? Because Heidegger. So Heidegger is a controversial philosopher. In the continental tradition, he did make some very substantial contributions to metaphysics and ontology. In fact, on the continental side of things, he's probably one of the most influential philosophers that there's ever been. He would influence the existentialists. So, firstly, for those who aren't sure what I'm talking about by this divide, in the 20th century, there was sort of a split between philosophy. Philosophy, as it was done on the continent of Europe, so in Germany and France and so forth. And then there was the analytic or Anglo-American philosophy, which was philosophy as it was practiced in the United Kingdom and North America. Each kind of tradition differed in terms of their methods, um, uh, and kind of didn't really like each other very much. Heidegger's on the continental side of things, although it's not a straightforward division, right? I mean, um, uh, you've got people from who came from the continent, like Wittgenstein, and Karl Popper. Uh, the Vienna Circle started on the continent, for goodness sake. Like analytic philosophy started on the continent. So, anyway, don't worry. That's that distinction. And then the existentialists, right? Life sucks and then you die. Um, Heidegger is a big influence on like Jean-Paul Sartre, although Heidegger would say that Sartre got all of his work wrong. Um, but yeah, yeah, as you are now learning in the comments, thank you, Quinn, for pointing that out. Heidegger was a Nazi. He was a member of the Nazi Party, like until it ceased to exist. Not a good guy. Um, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but as far as his philosophy goes, he's interested in the question of being. What is being? When we talk about being, what do we mean? Heidegger means being with a capital B. So he's not interested in the being of this being or that being, but being itself. And he thought that our preoccupation with the being of individual beings hides being itself. Oh, hello, sir. So it's like, I want to know about Yo-Yo here. I want to know, what is it for this being to be this being? What is it for this being to be the being that it is? And this one? And so on. What is it for all these beings to be the beings that they are? Well, Heidegger says, like, well, now you've lost focus on like capital B being as being. And that's what we really ought to be studying as ontologists, as metaphysicians. So he would say that if I'm looking at beings, I'm focusing on the ontic level, not the ontological level. Right? You know, one reason people don't like Heidegger is because he was a Nazi. But another reason people don't like Heidegger is because they're just like, it's nonsense, right? It sounds like nonsense. It is not nonsense. Okay, Heidegger is not just a nonsense bullshit artist. You can come after him for being a Nazi. Yes. Was he just using word salad? No. No, he wasn't. So just to be charitable as it's possible to be. Um, yeah, this is a rewatch lecture. Yeah. Well, being a little lowercase being is like a being, like me. I'm a being, you're a being, Oprah's a being, right? We're all beings. Um, but there is there's like lowercase beings like the noun, but then there's capital B being, which is like a noun and also a verb, right? What is being itself? That's what Heidegger wants to know about. Yeah. Well, look, no, I have very serious problems with Heidegger, which I will talk about. Ooh, I don't know if we're gonna have time. We might have to finish this next time. Um, I'll just say it now then. Heidegger is fascinating to me because I think his stuff about being is really interesting, and especially the modes, the ways of being. The way he describes technology as a way of being, for example, has always been fascinating to me. Like technology for Heidegger, yes, yes, Quinn, that's right. Um, that's the ready to hand and present at hand distinction, which again we'll have to get into next time. Um, Yeah, it was him. It was him. Um, I find what he has to say about technology fascinating. Technology is not just tools. Technology is a way of being. Technology enframes the world so that the world discloses itself to us in a different way than it would have to the Greeks with like their way of being, their way of enframing the world. Don't worry about what I'm saying, okay? I'm just nerding out. I'm not going to test you on this. Um, oh, philosophy tube. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So I've seen some of I like philosophy on the internet, okay? I think we should do that. I've seen some of Abigail Thorne's work. It's certainly very creative. Sometimes the details are not exactly right. Okay, so word of caution, right? I'm not saying don't go watch Philosophy Tube. She's getting it all wrong. No, but you've got to be careful with philosophy on YouTube unless you're getting it from an actual philosopher, like an expert. And I know that she has a master's degree in philosophy. Okay, I know. Um, I'm saying like you need to be going to a professor or a researcher, not a YouTuber, if that makes sense, right? So no shade on Abigail Thorne. Just remember she's a YouTuber, not a professor, okay? But you'll probably find something interesting and informative there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Like I don't I'm just saying, use your critical thinking skills. Be careful what you read on the internet. I watched one philosophy tube video from years ago where she said like she was talking about Kant and space and time and the categories of understanding, and all of a sudden she starts talking about the brain. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Kant said nothing about the brain. He was talking about the mind. It's little things like that you have to watch out for with popular philosophy on YouTube. Of course, you know what you can do is you can watch my videos. Um, I'm just kidding. My videos are probably a lot more boring than Abigail Thorne's, right? Here's what I will say about Heidegger. Besides his stuff on technology being very interesting to me, it's also sad and tragic and rage inducing, his associations with Nazis, and being a Nazi himself, right? Heidegger, it's so hard to work out, and I know that the recent scholarship seems to paint a pretty bad picture of him. He wasn't just towing, he wasn't just giving the party line and trying to save his career and stuff. He really was a Nazi. Like, he really did seem to believe these awful things. Um, but the really weird thing about Heidegger is that his mentor, Edmund Husserl, was Jewish, and most of his famous students were Jewish. Um, including Hannah Arendt, with whom he had an affair. And Hannah Arendt would go on to write Eichmann in Jerusalem, which was when they caught Adolf Eichmann, one of the architects of the Holocaust, and put him on trial in Jerusalem in the 60s. He'd been hiding in like South America or something. They got him, and Hannah Arendt documented that trial, did a lot of writing on evil and totalitarianism. She was Heidegger's student. So Heidegger's weird, right? The one thing that's really hard to forgive about him is what he said about Hitler, and his association with Nazism. Heidegger said, "I would have apologized for being a Nazi if the German people had gotten an apology from Hitler." And I've always thought to myself, that is such a damn cop out. You think you would ever get an apology from a megalomaniac like Hitler? Come on, Heidegger. You should be smarter than this. And that's what I really find, like, kind of like, that's like the unforgivable sin, right? I'll say more about this next time. We'll continue talking about being next time. One thing I will say is that, look, you can be a very, very talented philosopher and still be a horrible human being. And Heidegger seems to be, uh, maybe not the worst human being, but not a very good one. Yeah, yeah. I get it. I understand propaganda is look, we just had an election south of the border where apparently the majority of the people picked an authoritarian guy who doesn't care about the truth because he says he's going to make the country great. Um, History might not repeat exactly, but it does rhyme. And a lot of that is due to misinformation, disinformation, propaganda. Yeah, I know, as if. I can't believe it. I wasn't going to, but I can't believe it. You have a twice impeached felon who was found liable for rape. Are we doing this again? Like, oh, it's going to be a long 4 years. Uh, yeah, Jonah, that's the thing, right? Uh, he actually won the popular vote this time. It wasn't just a quirk of the electoral college. He actually won the popular vote. And yeah, April, I don't know. What is that? Like, you mean from the hurricanes and stuff, or yeah, during the 2016 election, Clinton won the popular vote. Um, Previously, Biden won the popular vote and the electoral college. This time, Trump won the popular vote and the electoral college. It's blowing my mind. But like Noamine said, people will vote for anyone besides a woman, let alone a black woman. Uh okay, bye Quinn. Yeah, sorry to get you all down talking about this, but yeah. I mean, look, I got issues with Kamala, but I mean, come on. Yeah. It's you know what though? If you're like me and you're angry and frustrated by all of this, that's okay. Take some time to feel that and process that. Um, hey, you know what? I'm not super old, but I'm old enough to remember the tail end of the Cold War, the Gulf War, the 9/11, 8 years of Bush. Survived all that. We'll get through this. Yeah. No, I don't watch Jubilee. I hate that channel. I believe you. Yeah, I believe the 20 Trump supporters are very misinformed. But I can't watch Jubilee because they both side. They're like, "Hey, uh, let's get some Jews and Nazis and see if we can find some middle ground." It's like, "No, no, we don't want middle ground with Nazis. Get out of here." And I don't believe in that project. There's no middle ground with fascists. Yeah. Yeah, it's the centrism. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, we should go. Some of you probably have other classes you need to go to. We'll finish talking about Heidegger next time, before we get to, I think it's the nature of the mind, chapter 8. So I'll see you all next time. Don't despair. Hang in there, everyone. Have a good one, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.